How many people don't have any idea what blockchain is? We got 1, 2, 3, okay, a couple. All right, and how many people are like programming in like Ethereum, blockchain stuff, or like pretty deep in it, like reading white papers, like all that shit? Ish. All right, cool. That helps. So yeah, basically, what I'm going to talk about is kind of like a big picture of like what's happening in the industry. So I'm going to talk about like current use cases, what's currently happening, like what's it for. So for the people who don't know too much about like what it is, I'll go into a little bit of like how it's being applied, and then I'll go into the challenges. And this is where it gets like really fun. I like love talking about like what the problems are, and then you know, like what's next. And then mainly I want this to be really fruitful for you guys. And so if you guys have any questions, like feel free to raise your hand, and we can have like more of a dialogue around this stuff. Especially because some of this stuff is like really, you know, it goes out like really far in the mind. It's like really mental. And so if something's like, hey, like this doesn't make any sense, or hey, let's talk about this, or I have a question that's relevant, feel free. Like I'd rather it just be tailored to you guys. Like I'll just ditch the slides if, you know, if it comes to it. So yeah, a little bit about me. I'm Max. I run a company down here in Boulder called Transformation Agency. We have an office at Galvanize if you've like ever walked by it. And essentially what we are is we've been like masterminding this new decentralized governance model, a new business model that would allow people to like come together in small groups and get paid based on their contribution rather than like an hourly wage. And so the reason that applies to like blockchain technology, or the reason why I got into blockchain technology, is because the blockchain infrastructure, this whole movement of decentralization, really applies to how I've been thinking about the world for the last 2 to 3 years, and it's really promising. And so I got into Bitcoin around 2010. I was in college. I went to school in Philadelphia at Drexel University, bought some Bitcoin, and was like, all right, this is like really cool, and kept my eye on it. Bitcoin at the time was like $3 a coin, and I bought like a whole bunch, and then I like sold it and like gave it to friends, and then now look at it, it's like $5,700. I was like, all right, I'm one of those guys with one of those stories. But yeah, so that's kind of like how I got into technology. I was always like a programmer from a very early age. I ran like a freelance like web design thing when I was in high school. I never really liked jobs. I tried getting jobs at like restaurants and like other places, but hated getting bossed around. I like worked for a corporation for 6 months, and 3 months in, my manager was just like treating me like shit and like taking my phone, like throwing it, and like saying like really weird remarks. So I told him to fuck off. And so like the whole like bureaucracy and working for people and being controlled, like I never really liked it. And so I never felt like I fit in society. And so that's why blockchain really appeals to me, and like how I got into it and what I'm doing at my company, because it's offering a new platform for a new way of like working together, and for new systems and new structures in society to emerge. But anyways, I've like run a couple other companies before, and they all dissolved. There's like all sorts of problems, and I'll go into some more about blockchain and organizational stuff that I'm seeing going on in the industry. I launched my own coin last year. I wanted to just see, like one of the things that I saw was that the whole space was just like built around hype. Like there's like all these coins coming out, everyone's doing ICOs, all these tokens. And so I'm like, what if I just create something that I'm very transparent about it being absolutely worth nothing? And so I created this coin called the most private coin ever. And the whole premise is like, well, what do you get with it? I'm like, well, I can't tell you, it's the most private coin ever. But you get access to the most private thing ever. People are like, what's that? Well, it's like, I can't tell you, it's the most private thing ever. And it kind of started as a joke. I was like with my friend, and we're just like laughing, and we're like, why don't we just start a company called the most private thing ever, like LLC? So we registered the business, and that's kind of like what we used it for. But anyways, I just wanted to see if I could program the token, put it on an exchange, make sales, do a little bit of marketing around it. And so I have quite like an experience like in those realms. And then mainly the main project that I'm working on is the light leadership governance model, which is the decentralized governance model that I was talking about. But anyways, that's like just a little bit about me, and let's keep it going. So I already asked you guys questions. So really, I guess let me ask you guys, like when you guys think of like blockchain and Ethereum and Bitcoin, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Like why are you guys here? Like what excites you about the technology?
Security.
Security?
Yeah.
Sweet. Transparency? Disruptive? Fuck yeah, it is. Nice. Redistribution of wealth? Cool. Nice. Yeah, so these are all things that the blockchain community really values, like transparency, security, redistribution of wealth. These are all things. I'm not going to go like too heavy into like all the different cases because it sounds like a lot of you guys have a little bit of experience, but mainly, there's things. You guys know what smart contracts are? Just a few people? Just a few people. Okay. So let me, I'll just explain it this way. Let's see. All right, so basically the blockchain is useful for all of those different things. So one of the main things that blockchain is being used for is for a decentralized way of owning your own currencies. So it allows people to pay each other in different countries very, very quickly without relying on type of a government infrastructure. And so rather than having one central server that's storing, that's responsible for a bank or just any type of centralized server, it allows data to be spread out across many different people. So for those who aren't aware of Ethereum or blockchain or whatever, you imagine a website, you go to a website, GoDaddy.com for instance, they own like all of the servers, all of the data. You can just think of that as like one computer for this instance, but if you go to an Ethereum website, all the data that is from that website is stored on everyone who's running an Ethereum node's computer. So it allows everyone to own the data in this transparent way without it being controlled by one particular party that can manipulate it. So it does have more security. It allows for a greater degree of transparency between systems because they're all using this shared system that has all the transaction data on it. And with the smart contract, so in Ethereum, Bitcoin and Ethereum, Bitcoin you can just think of that as a cryptocurrency. With Ethereum, they have this thing called a smart contract, and a smart contract is basically a contract that you just like write in code that allows you to interact with a set of rules that's held by the blockchain and not a particular person. So if I wanted to create, if Kieran, if you were to lend me $5 and I'm like, hey, in a month I'm going to give you back $10 for like whatever reason, you'd have to trust me in order to deliver on that promise, whereas we could create a smart contract. He could fund that. I could fund it with $10. He could fund it with $5. And then built into the code, it would release the $10 to him after a month based on those rule sets. It's held by the technology and not a person. So the whole premise behind it is essentially to create a trustless system. And I think there's problems with that as well. But that's essentially the premise of the blockchain, is to create all these computer programs so that no one has to trust one particular person. It's like all held in the technology and create some more level of security there. Does that make sense? Again, that's like the whole premise. There are issues with that I see, but yeah, I'm going to go into like all of the different like holes that I'm seeing in the industry, and we'll get there. So basically, I found this GIF image. This is basically what I see the blockchain doing, is it's taking like the hierarchical structures of society, bureaucracy, control-based, positional power. You think of any type of corporation, there's the CEO, the CMO, there's the boss. If you're the employee, you get told what to do. If you do anything outside those bounds, you get fired. You don't have creativity. They're telling you what you get paid. I'm seeing this type of blockchain technology as a complete, who said disruptive? Was that you? I just see it completely cracking into the fabric of the structures that were created in order to maintain power in the world, to like manipulate people and to control people ultimately. So I see that as a chip in the fabric of that. And that kind of sucks for that dude who built that whole thing. It's like, damn. So mainly, it's really not that big right now. This is like pretty niche. Like you got, how many people are there? Like 30 people in here. I was at ETH Waterloo. There was like 400 hackers. There was like 3,000 people that applied. This was in Canada. It was like an Ethereum hackathon. And really like, there's not a whole lot of people talking about this stuff. Like people know what Bitcoin is. People are starting to know what Ethereum is. But in terms of people like really diving into it, there's really not that many people. And so there's really not a whole lot going on, or everything that's going on is like pretty much underneath the surface in these like really niche crowds. So it's really cool to be here and like see who's got their heads in there. But it's mainly being used for crowdfunding. ICOs, people are raising millions of dollars by just being like, hey, we got a token, and if you buy it, we'll give you something. We'll give you like some software maybe in the future. And people are raising $100 million, $200 million, like all this ridiculous shit. That's mainly how it's being used now. Investing, you can buy all these different coins. There's probably hundreds of Ethereum tokens. You can buy Bitcoin. There's Zcash. There's all these different cryptocurrencies that you can buy, and mainly people are just getting them so that they can invest in it. Ethereum a couple years ago was like $4 for an Ether, and now it's 400 or 300. Bitcoin was $3 in 2010, and now it's 5,700. So people are realizing, oh, this is a solid investment, even if they don't know anything about it. This is a really cool use case. The UN was using Ethereum tokens to give funds to people in third world countries for like food and for like pasta and like olive oil and like all sorts of stuff where their financial systems weren't really stable. So Ethereum offers and Bitcoin offers a way to own funds in your own way without any type of infrastructure from the government. Really, really exciting for third world countries or places that don't have access to those types of infrastructures that we have in the US. But most people have smartphones. Most people have internet access somewhere, and so that's a really exciting use case. Payments between countries quickly and efficiently. We don't have to have the same bank. Like I can send you $1 million in Ether and you'll have it in 5 minutes. Pretty cool. You don't have to worry about any type of intermediaries or banks or government regulations, at least within the technology. And then people are using it for stuff like coupons. If you buy this, I'll give you some cryptocurrency. Or they're just creating their own tokens. I created the most private coin ever. There's no use to it. Some people are creating tokens called utility tokens that have use for their software. But overall, there really isn't a whole lot of stuff that's useful, or you'd be like, oh man, that's so groundbreaking. Or if it is there, I haven't seen it yet. There's like some really cool like use cases of being like, oh cool, we can connect two different buyers together in this decentralized way, but very, very basic things that we just do in person, but they're like, hey, we can put this on the blockchain, but yeah, it's still very, very infant. But really, like what I see this whole blockchain stuff and cryptocurrency is the beginning to an infrastructure for a world where everyone has the resources that they need. And we're still living in a society that values scarcity in its structure. So it values not having enough, and that's where all the competition comes from, and that's where all the disconnection from people comes from. And really that type of mentality just like sucks to live in. And so we have plenty of resources in the world. There's plenty of money for everyone. There's plenty of food. There's plenty of water. There's plenty of everything. We just haven't created the systems in order to really adapt that. And so I see blockchain technology, especially Ethereum at least at this point, as a start of that infrastructure that would allow an abundance mentality to arise here on Earth. Yeah, in terms of that abundance mindset, like imagine a planet where you didn't need to work for resources. Has anyone heard of like universal basic income, stuff like that? So imagine if there was an abundance of resources for everyone, and everyone just had the stuff that they needed to survive, and then as a species, we could start to like think about just doing shit that we wanted to do, not because we had to, but because it's like really fun. We could work on these different projects and just like create. If you've been to Burning Man, it could just be like that 24/7. Shit would be nuts. So the challenges. Any questions on that before I go into some of the problems? Cool. So the challenges. You guys may have heard, for those who are following it more often, the SEC came out with regulations. There was this company called the DAO, a Decentralized Autonomous Organization. They were basically the first organization to come out on the blockchain saying, hey, we're an investment fund. If you invest money in here, then you become an investor, and then you can vote on the projects in which we're going to give it to, and then you'll get a return if those companies are successful. Now, they launched, there was this whole thing, they got hacked, $50 million. Someone just like took it out of their account using this bug in the code. If anyone's heard of Ethereum Classic, it basically caused a fork in the network and created a whole nother cryptocurrency to come out, which is now what's called Ethereum now. But anyways, the SEC came out and they're like, hey, if you're selling these tokens that you're creating, even though they're digital, if you're promising that it's going to improve in value, that's actually a security. And so now the government's like, all right, this is a prime position to set some standards, set some rules about cryptocurrencies and tokens and Ethereum and Bitcoin. And so this whole technology comes with legal implications that we're not really aware of. I was at this conference about a month ago, 3 weeks ago, called the Global Blockchain Summit. It was like down in Golden for a few days. And there was a lot of lawyers there talking there and a lot of people from the government. And no one has any idea like what the implications are at this point. Everyone's still trying to figure it out. Basically, the only thing that they have figured out is that if you're telling people that you can make money with my token or something like that, you have to register it as a security and you have to be accredited investors and all these different things. Go ahead. It can't regulate Ethereum, but it can regulate people who are acting within that platform in the US. So the government, even though it's a decentralized platform and it's not based in any one particular place, because you're conducting activity in America, you're still under the jurisdiction of American law. So yeah, does that answer your question like more or less? So if you're doing something shady, according to the US government, even if it's like online in a decentralized network, they still consider it illegal activity. Yeah, exactly. So in terms of like what's happening legally, it's still, people don't really know like how it's going to work in terms of selling tokens, in terms of giving other people tokens, in terms of paying taxes. Coinbase users, I read this article that like 10% of Coinbase users who bought Ethereum or Bitcoin paid their taxes. So the IRS was pretty pissed about it. They're like, hey, only 10% of the people actually paid your taxes. And they're like, yeah, like we can't help you. And so it's still, we don't know if people are going to get sued for certain things. The government's kind of still trying to figure it out. I called the SEC a couple weeks ago. I was like, hey, can I talk to someone about like cryptocurrency? And the woman's like, what's that? So like it's still kind of weird in terms of doing crowdfunding and ICOs and all sorts of stuff. We're currently talking to lawyers about getting our business model, our decentralized business model, onto like a legal platform, and that's still coming with its own issues. Because we're basically carving into reality. We're creating new systems that haven't existed before, and so new precedents are going to have to be set. So people might get sued, they might get a lot of money, there might be lawsuits, all sorts of stuff that no one really knows. Governance. So this is a huge challenge with the blockchain space right now. Has anyone heard of Tezos? Oh, quite a bit of people. Did you guys hear about what just happened with their founders? Not detailed. So we're going to start to see this. So now in the blockchain space, all of these companies are coming out, the decentralized autonomous organizations being like, hey, we're decentralized, everyone's an equal, look, it's on the blockchain, we got this decentralized technology, I don't own it. The problem with that is that they're still running companies that are centralized in nature. So even if they're using decentralized technology under the law and under their structure, there's still a CEO, a CFO, a CMO, they're still employees, they're still controlling how decisions get made. And so it's still centralized in a sense. That's two separate systems like colliding. So there's tons of people that are using this decentralized technology for centralized ways. So it doesn't actually necessarily mean that everything on blockchain is secure or decentralized. This company, Tezos, they basically had the largest ICO. I think they made $235 million with their token launch, and they're a specific blockchain software. I won't get into the details of that. But they have the same problems that normal companies outside of the blockchain have too. Founder conflict. This is huge. People have IPOs, they make millions of dollars, their company blows up, they get tons of money, and then people try to control the decisions of the company, and that results in conflict. Like imagine it, has anyone like been in started a company with your friend, or like even been in a project, and there's like all this conflict, and like one person wants it this way, another person wants it this way, and then how do you resolve it? Well, when there's $235 million on the line, and you're trying to control that, that causes lots of problems. And so that whole project basically just fell apart, and they just delayed their token launch indefinitely. So the people who invested in that may never ever see any type of like product or result or anything like that. It's like a married couple and like one other person, and the married couple will probably get a divorce. Like all sorts of relational problems that exist off the blockchain are still happening on blockchain companies. Huge problem with this whole decentralization movement is that they're not actually using a decentralized governance model. Another big problem is Blockchain is super confusing. To explain this to your grandma, she's like, what the fuck is this, right? In order to even run an Ethereum program on your computer, you need to download MetaMask. You need to figure out how to set up your own wallet. You need to know what a wallet address is, how to send it. If you want to add a custom token, you have to add that. You can't even do it on your phone right now, or if you can, you have to get test flight, and then you have to apply to a beta. It's a mess. Even for people who are technologically inclined, it's still not simple. And so one of the biggest challenges with blockchain being adapted is its ease of use. And the way that I see it is like the grandma test. Like if my grandma can't use it, it's not ready for mass adoption at this point. Still very, very confusing. Another challenge with getting into blockchain and just the whole industry as a whole is I don't know if you can see it, but the risk factor. I'm on this Slack channel called Status. Status is it's like an app for your phone that basically runs an Ethereum node, so you can access Ethereum applications from your phone. Because you need to run a node, you can't just go to a website and have it run. And about 5 or 6 times a day, I get these messages from random people being like, hey, there's a token sale going on right now for this particular project, which is huge. There's thousands of people in the channel. It's raising tons of money, lots of attention. And they're like, hey, just send your Ethereum to this address. And people are doing it, but there's so many phishing scams. Like this one, for instance, one of the biggest wallets to manage your Ethereum is called myetherwallet.com. And if on Slack, if you guys use Slack, you guys probably use Slack, right? So if you send an @everyone message, it actually sends you an email with a notification. People are just going into Slack channels being like, hey, everyone, by the way, there's hackers that are going on. They'll actually say this. There's stuff being hacked. Make sure you check your Ether to see if it's still there. And then they'll give you a link like this, myetherwall L instead of T.com. And then they'll just steal hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of Ether. If I was a hacker, that's probably what I'd be doing because it's genius. And it's still working, but I'm getting 5 to 10 of these messages per day. And so if I wasn't smart enough, they'd be having all of my money. And it's still working. So from a technological standpoint, people's stuff, even if you own your own Ether and it's not a bank that owns it, that means that you're responsible for the security. And that's very challenging for a lot of people because they don't even know. They're not even aware of the security implications of what it takes to run in technology. I just read of this new hack. It's called a zero character or zero length character that you can actually put in a URL. So I could put myetherwallet.com, but after the T, I could put a 0 width character that would actually link them to a phishing site. But it's actually there's no space, or there's no different character. It's a 0 width one. So you can steal people's stuff that way. So people's funds are getting destroyed right now. And it's confusing. If you lose your private keys to your wallet, all of your money is completely gone. I'm convinced I still have about 5 or 10 Bitcoin hanging out in a wallet somewhere that I just kind of left hanging that I don't remember when I had it in college. That's going to start to happen because there's no centralized services, then you have to trust yourself and your own skills, which in this type of confusing environment, this stuff's going to happen. In terms of approachability, it's also a challenge within the blockchain space. It's super confusing. There's lots of hype. Even at ETH Waterloo I went, there was 400 hackers, all of the bigger companies in blockchain or in the Ethereum space, and it's so built on hype. My personal opinion is I'm looking at these companies and they're like, yeah, we do this really awesome shit that you can trade ERC20 tokens with each other and look at this amazing protocol. And then I'm looking at them it's pretty simple. I don't really see it as groundbreaking, but it's everyone's yo, I got the next best shit. It's fucking awesome. It's just very hype focused. And so because of that, there isn't any sustainable solutions that are actually changing the world at this point. And I think that's deterring a lot of people, or people are being well, what's the point? And so I see that as a barrier to entry for a lot of people. It's scary and previously associated with a lot of criminals. Bitcoin came out and Silk Road was huge. Cryptocurrency was oh, you could just buy drugs on the internet. That's the only reason that people would use it. And because of that, and then that's starting to change. It's now in the news now. People are talking about Bitcoin and whatnot. But even the government, I was talking to some people in the government and asking them about cryptocurrency, and they're we won't even touch cryptocurrency because they're still associating it with criminals. And so they know that they have to get into the blockchain space. They know that it's a big deal, and they're going to get left behind if they don't start building infrastructure in the space. But cryptocurrencies, they don't want to touch. And I think a lot of people are like, well, you know, criminals, like this is criminal activity. Like you can buy guns and drugs and like all sorts of stuff. And yes, that's true. And there's also a lot of cases where that's not the case. And it's also, you know, confusing, like we mentioned before. So what's next? There's a lot of collaboration going on. One of the coolest things that I saw when I was at ETH Waterloo was like how many people were just building solutions and just like having fun and like figuring out new things together. This is the beauty of blockchain, is that most of it, all of it's pretty much open source. There is this like battle going on between like corporations trying to take the open source software for themselves, even though it's open source, and like trying to control it. It's kind of weird, but overall the open source nature of the industry is really beautiful because it allows people to come in, create solutions, help each other, go to these different hackathons, come out with cool stuff. It's like a lot of creativity and a lot of like youthful energy that's going into the system right now. There's new job opportunities. If you like really like blockchain and you're getting into programming, like you won't be this guy. For any South Park fans. There's tons of opportunities. Everyone's looking for blockchain developers. They know it's huge. And so there's a lot of opportunity to like start building and start contributing and getting involved in projects. And this is kind of like the 1990s of the internet, like when HTTP was just coming out, and you know, you can kind of build anything, and it was like, oh, this is awesome. It's kind of like that. And so like web designers were like, oh, you can do that? You know, I was in high school thinking that web design was easy, and yet I was charging $25 an hour because adults had no idea how to do it. It's going to be like that on crack for people who can program on the blockchain. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's really competitive because there aren't very many right now, but supply and demand is great because then if you can fill it, then you're going to get a job like pretty quickly. But it is everyone is like looking for it, and it's like very hard to come by at this point. So that's what I mean by there's a lot of opportunity in this space. But yeah, that's totally going on. Yeah, there's really not a lot. There's more now. Check out the Consensus Academy. They do like a whole like training program, and I know it's online. I don't know what the time investment is. I don't know like how much it costs, but there are starting to come out with like boot camps, like very, very niche ones that you can go into. Otherwise, you just have to go into like Stack Overflow, like read the documentation, pop into the open source communities, and just like start to like network and figure out the channels. But other than that, there really isn't. It's not like learning JavaScript or something right now where you can just Google it. There's guys who's like, all right, someone can program in like blockchain, like, let's talk. So that's an opportunity. Another thing that we'll see coming up is a lot of screw-ups. Like I said, a lot of legal problems. People are going to get sued. I was talking to my friend, Amateo, and he was telling me that there's this whole thing coming out with smart contract remediation. So if a smart contract, if it's to operate like a similar contract in the law, what happens if a smart contract fails or gets hacked or gets bugged and there's a lawsuit based on this code? How does that work? So I think there's going to start to be lawsuits and legal precedents when it comes to that. Scams, people are still getting scammed. But my favorite thing about the blockchain, because it's open source, because it can fork and change very, very quickly, is its anti-fragile nature. So a fragile system would be one, like if you take a vase and you break it, it's like broken and that's kind of it. Like you have to like start from scratch and build a new one. An anti-fragile system is one that the more that you fuck with it, the more that you break it, is the stronger that it gets. And so that's what like really, I kind of, on a personal level, I kind of see my life that way. Like if I'm insecure about something, or if I'm like really nervous about something, I'm like, cool, like make me more nervous or like make me more insecure, and then like find the crack that's like in my body and then like exploit it, and that's what actually makes me stronger. And so I love that concept when it comes to blockchain and like decentralization, because if you just hack the shit out of the system, then the hackers are going to find all of the problems and then they're going to fix them, and then a new one's going to come out. And so the more that people can make mistakes and the more that this thing can fail is ultimately the stronger that it'll get in the future. So that's really exciting to me. And then the next thing of like what's next is like this new organizational structure. Like I said, these companies that are on this decentralized technological infrastructure, Ethereum for instance, but they're still organizing in a centralized way. And so people have been trying to figure this out, but they haven't really found how to organize in this decentralized way that isn't control-based. And so I think that's what's going to need to happen in order for some kind of decentralized technology to take off, is to allow the people to operate in actually a purely decentralized way. So yeah, it's kind of like my quick little spiel. So yeah, that's all I had planned, and then the rest is like questions, like whatever you guys want to talk about. All ears. Yeah.
So I've been having this question.
I think so. I think like in order to, well, yes and no. So I think the structure is like solid enough that I can support that type of market cap. But, and I don't think someone can just like come in and break the whole thing. That's the beautiful thing about the blockchain is like one person tries to do that and the whole thing is fine because it's just like one bad actor in the network that people don't listen to. But for Bitcoin, for instance, if 51% of the mining rigs are run in China and everyone in China is like, yo, let's get together and like let's just like screw up the whole thing, then that's a problem. So of course, any type of technological system is able to be hacked. Someone can come out with a bug that actually just like, kind of like ransomware, goes into all the computers, takes all the private keys, takes all their stuff, moves it to a different wallet. Like all that stuff is still very possible because people are involved. And technology is never perfect because of the human element. And so I think as long as there's humans involved, like there's always going to be the potential for it to all crash, to all get destroyed. Legal infrastructure could come in that could destroy it, at least for like a little time period. But cool thing is, it's built by like a lot of like nerds in their mom's basement that like have nothing better to do than create something really awesome. So, yeah. I mean, I think it's awesome. Like even if you think about voting, right? Like voting sucks right now. Like you have to go to the place, you have to wait, you have to fill out a ballot. They have to recount the thing all the time. The whole structure of that is just completely screwed up. And so by putting it onto the blockchain, if you have like an identification that's linked to your vote, then that allows them to have a more transparent or a more accurate record built into this type of technology. Problem is with identification, if someone hacks your computer and then logs into your account, that could be a problem, unless it's like linked to like your thumbprint even, but then you still run into problems, you know what I mean? And so I don't think there's any type of perfect solution with that quite yet. Estonia is doing that. There's different applications that are attempting to solve that problem, like Uport. But I think it's a step in the right direction. Anything that you just do like normally, especially in governments, if they just put on the blockchain, the fact that they even have information stored on a computer is amazing. Like, when I was hanging out, like doing community service for like the government for like a little bit, like they were just like filing stuff in boxes, like with paper. So like the fact that they even have some kind of system that would store all their data in some kind of robust way that they could resource, I think would solve a lot of problems. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, I don't really know what's going to happen. I think there's going to be like a lot of forks, which is like what we're starting to see now. So like Bitcoin Cash, like, okay, what does that do? Bitcoin Gold, like that just came out like yesterday. Like what the fuck is that? Like all these like niche things are coming out. And I think it's just kind of like the wild, wild west, like a gold rush. Like people are just going to fork and fork and fork, and there might be consensus, there might not be. But even on the things on consensus where a new fork is chained, it'll be like survival of the fittest. Like if something's valuable enough, it might take and create like a new robust infrastructure. So that's the beauty of consensus. Downside of consensus is that, especially when it comes to forking, if someone creates this really beautiful structure that's really amazing, and you need 51% of the people to agree on that in order to create a fork, that's a problem, especially if 51% of the people are unaware of like what's actually happening, which is kind of like the planet right now. So, but then again, they could just like take their own structure, create their own chain. If they do enough marketing, then something will take. And so, I don't know what's going to happen, but I think it's just going to spread and spread and spread, and then whatever ones take, they'll take. Natural selection, yeah. I think it's just like, this is just like nature, and so I'm just like watch it play out. Yeah.
So for like one of like the really open
Right. I don't know if Ethereum's going to be the one that's used. Bitcoin doesn't have smart contracts, so it makes it more difficult to use it that way. So I think Ethereum right now is the best option. There's other blockchains that are coming out that might be, I can't remember what the company is called, but it's a connector between different blockchains that allows them to actually share the same data. So I think something like that will come out and then it doesn't really matter, or won't matter as much. Kind of like how we have different servers now with different operating systems. But to answer your question about like adoptability, a huge part of it is because one, it's hard to find developers. Two, legally, there's not much going, like people don't really know. There's not a lot of educated people in this stuff. And then, especially public transportation, you're talking government systems, they're behind even without blockchain. And so now that you incorporate this new technology that's very, very new that most people don't know about, I think it's going to take like even longer for that to become adaptable. But yeah, I mean that's the thing is like you could do all those things off chain right now too. Like you could just create a program that says, hey, you get a coin, and then you could just like, redeem that for cash, and it'd probably be like a lot easier. So there hasn't been like a lot of convincing for why people like need to get on this system, and a lot of people don't right now. It's just not that huge of an issue. I think it'd be helpful in terms of like record keeping. Like that's mainly it. Just to have a ledger that's decentralized, that's like validated in the network is huge for companies and accounting and seeing what's going on and analyzing their data and supply chain. That's pretty much. Right, you could just, yeah. I mean, I just made the most private coin ever and I was like, I'm gonna make 1 million of these and sell them for $1 each. Great, I'll be a millionaire if I sell all of them, you know what I mean? And what I love about that is because if right now the government can create money, you know, they can just like print it. Well, the challenge with that is that no one else can and have it be like, held by society, but right now everyone can. So it basically eliminates it as the problem. So if you can make it so no one can do it, or that everyone can do it, then it just becomes a non-issue and then people don't have to like worry about it so much. So in that sense, then anyone can just create value from nothing, which is kind of like how value is created anything, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, I have something of value and I just make it valuable, and if people buy it, then it's valuable. Right now, Ethereum is just kind of transferring electrical energy into digital currency and then applying value to that. But it's still, I don't think it's still accurate based in reality, but it's getting there. Helping. I think it's going to help. The more regulations that you have is like, the more regulations that come in means it's having more weight in society. So the fact that the SEC came out with this thing about the DAO means that they're thinking about it, which means that it's getting way more press. You know, Bitcoin was like out like way before like people even like started knowing about it, and then CNN comes out with this thing like, hey, you can buy drugs on Silk Road with Bitcoin, and everyone's like, oh yeah, and now Bitcoin's exploding. You know what I mean? So like any type of regulation around it, I think actually improves like the solidity of the system. And obviously, it has its own problems too. If they start trying to control the decisions and taxes and you know whatever, that has its like own implications. But ultimately, in this type of decentralized way, even if they come in with control-based things, then people are going to come out and create new solutions, which I think is what's happening on the planet. And so a technology like this will basically just magnify the relationships between government and people and people and people very, very quickly. I think it's just a magnifier. It's just like, here's what's happening. Oof, let's lock it in. Does that make sense? From my understanding, it's proof of stake. This is the challenge. Like, I don't even fully understand it. Right. Like, my understanding is like, it's kind of like, instead of like you solving this problem and then me giving you $100, you stake your coins, you put your $100 here, and if you make like a bad decision, then I like take that away from you.
Yeah.
Is that like more accurate?
The bad decision would be like maybe development or
Probably consulting.
something.
I mean, if you're the guy who's like, yo, I got programmers, or I know how to connect you between the lawyers, or like what you need to do in order to get your infrastructure like set up like on the blockchain, which is like something that I'm just like starting to do. Is people are like, okay, like I want to get my stuff on the blockchain, and I don't consider myself like a developer. Like if someone asked me, hey, can you create like a secure, robust, smart contract for this token launch? I'd be like, no. If someone's like, hey, can you create a token for me? I'm like, sure, like that's pretty easy, but to create it where their business is actually running on it, it's a different story, but I can connect them with the programmers, I can connect them with the lawyers, I can tell them, here's the latest with the legal stuff, like here's what you need to do, here's what you need to think about. And that seems to be important. Because most people can't communicate with coders. Like it's very challenging, and most developers can't communicate in this business sense, nor would they want to, because they're focused on the code. They don't want to deal with people. They just want to create cool shit. So I think that's like a huge potential. Yeah, the fact that you guys even know what blockchain is like puts you like in the top like 0.1% of like humanity right now. So if someone's like, what's blockchain? You're like, oh, it's like this like shared ledger that's like decentralized. And then you just throw some other buzzwords out there and they're like, oh shit, I need to get in on that. You know what I mean? But yeah. Sure. Yeah. So we need a better interface. There needs to be, one, wallets, I think, need not to be these like giant like cryptographic hashes, at least on the front end. So if someone wants to send you money, right now they have Ethereum name service, so you can actually register, Kieran.eth, and I can just like send you Ether to that address. But right now, it's for most people without that type of name, it's like this like giant string. So for grandma to go online and get MetaMask and store the keys, then that becomes a problem. I think there's going to be some kind of centralized service that will take care of like all the privacy for you. So like you think about Coinbase, their backend for all they can't even see your private keys even if they wanted to. Like what they do for security is absolutely insane and nuts. I don't have a problem with centralized services for stuff like that, and for most people that might just be useful. Other people want it to be decentralized and can handle their own privacy, but to tell your average Joe, hey, you have to be decentralized and you need to learn all this stuff to do it, it's not sustainable to teach people that. But in order for the decentralized part to become more user-friendly, there needs to be, I don't have a solution off the top of my head. Because decentralized in nature means like if you're owning the data, then no matter what you do with that owning, then that's how vulnerable you are. So I think awareness is huge. You know what I mean? Most people wouldn't know about that hack where you could like a phishing attempt. My mom sent me an email from Ray-Bans, and she's like, hey, look, these sunglasses are like, 200% off. They're like $50 instead of $400. And I was like, all right. And then I click it, and then I'm like, wait a second. This is weird, and then I go back and I look at the links, and I'm like, this is just a straight up phishing scam. But my mom's like, yeah, look at this is awesome. I'm like, I call her up, I'm like, Mom, I hope you didn't put your credit card in there. Like, yeah, they totally just jacked your shit. And she's like, oh, I didn't even know. You know what I mean? So it's, I don't know. Is the problem with the technology, or is the problem with the people not having awareness? I think it's a bit of both. I think more awareness needs to come in, and then the technology just needs to make it user-friendly so that they don't even have to deal with private keys or know what any of that stuff is. They can log in with a username and password and be fine. Yeah. Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, if any of you guys want to talk further, I'm going to hang around here for like a little bit until everyone pieces out. Here's my number, here's my email, my website. If you guys are at Galvanize downtown, come check out our office. Transformation Agency is the company. If you go to our website, there's not much. It just says Transformation Agency. It's hard to say what we do. But we've got an office, and yeah, hit me up if you guys have any questions or like want any support. If you guys are like trying to get a job, like I don't know, like whatever, I'm available as a resource. So yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It's been a pleasure.